Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist Ben Gallagher. This is the third one in the Ecology series. It's looking at food webs and interdependence. It follows on from Ecology 2. At the end of Ecology 2, we started to talk about how organisms aren't just affected by each other, but can be affected by lots of other things as well. This really develops that concept. Again, it's for the GCSE course, and please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Thanks. So let's do a quick recap from the Ecology 1 video on food chains. And let's just throw the trophic levels back up there. So we start off with the producer, which are almost always plants because they're producing glucose and the other food molecules largely as a result of photosynthesis. Primary consumers can eat them, secondary consumers eat those, and tertiary consumers come along and eat the secondary consumers. Of course, those are all linked together by arrows, and the arrows indicate the energy flow going from each trophic level to the next. So those are the trophic levels, that's showing energy. If you think back to Ecology 1 as well, we showed how the energy can be lost in those transitions. Just something that I'm not sure I've mentioned before, but please remember, organisms can belong to multiple trophic levels. Okay, and that's something that we're going to develop a little bit more today, because if you're an omnivore, you're going to be eating plants, but you might also be eating animals, so you'd be a secondary consumer or higher. So please don't think organisms are locked into any one trophic level. They only really are if they're either a producer, because they're only plants, are only producing, or a herbivore, which is only ever going to be a primary consumer. Otherwise, you can belong in multiple levels on there. But let's develop this concept. So what we're going to look at, let's look at a specific food web now, food chain from a British woodland habitat. Standard one that you should be familiar with: grass being eaten by a rabbit, being eaten by a fox, being eaten by a red kite. Now, red kite is a large bird of prey. If you don't know what that is, they're very common now in southern England. You see them flying over my village all the time. They're big. They couldn't take a full-grown adult fox maybe, but they could certainly predate on the smaller foxes, on younger ones, or just smaller foxes. Okay, so we've got an easy to follow food chain there. But as we said in the predator-prey relationship, foxes don't just hunt rabbits. That's not their only food. Rabbits aren't only eaten by foxes. It's a lot more complex than that. For example, rabbits are also eaten by red kites. So straight away, we've got to put an extra arrow to bypass the foxes. So we're kind of no longer talking about chains. If you look at the title now, we're now talking about food webs, because food chains just aren't realistic. So if we start to develop this, let's put another producer into it now and put dandelions in there. Dandelion leaves are eaten by a lot of organisms. Dandelions have the bright yellow flowers, and they're the ones that when they change form and go to seed, they're the ones that you can blow and do the dandelion clocks things. But dandelions are also eaten by rabbits. Rabbits don't only eat grass, but dandelions are also eaten by slugs. And slugs can also eat grass. So you can see how many arrows I'm having to put on there now, drawing over them. They're starting to get a bit messy. Slugs can be eaten by hedgehogs, but then think, hedgehogs can be eaten by a fox or a red kite. Or indeed, hedgehogs could be eaten by a sparrowhawk. If you don't know what that is, there's a picture of it. It's a smaller bird of prey. Okay, it's a lot smaller than a red kite. So we're starting to mix things up now. But of course, sparrowhawks don't only eat hedgehogs, they eat squirrels. And squirrels eat hazelnuts, which come off hazel trees. Those aren't the only things that squirrels eat, though. And of course, squirrels can also be eaten by a red kite or be eaten by a fox. And indeed, a rabbit could be eaten by a sparrowhawk. We're starting to get very messy now once you actually really start to link everything together. And that's the thing about food webs. They try and give a bigger representation of what's actually happening within a habitat. But it often gets very messy, especially if you were trying to do a huge and highly diverse habitat with thousands of different species, trying to link all the various interactions. It would just be an absolute mess. So accurate food webs don't really exist because they get far too complex. But they do give a much, much better representation of what's happening in a habitat than just a food chain would. So an accurate and complete food map would get very messy. Okay, so let's look at a food web it's a bit more definite, a bit more organized. And let's start to pick it apart a little bit. So if I pull this one up here, you've got a whole bunch of organisms there linked together with those red arrows showing what eats what. And remember, the arrow shows where the energy goes. So if you look at the direction of the arrow, it should show the energy from one organism going into the next one. But let's pick this apart by trophic levels to start off with. So I've put circles around these ones at the bottom. These are the producers: corn, flowering plant, lavender, and mangoes. The things that eat those are the primary consumers. So we've got the grasshopper, the butterfly, and the fruit fly, all three of which are eating those producers, so they are primary consumers. If we go up another level, we've got 4 secondary consumers, because all 4 of those are eating the primary consumers that are beneath them. You've got them eating the grasshopper, eating the butterfly, and eating the fruit fly, so they are very definitely secondary consumers. Which means the 3 at the top up there, those are our tertiary consumers. Those are eating our secondary consumers. However, think about the comment I made earlier about the food web and about how organisms can occupy more than one level. Because if you actually look carefully at this, we can add 2 more circles to the tertiary consumers. We can circle the thrush and we can circle the frog. Because both of those, even though we had them circled before as secondary consumers, they're also tertiary depending on which line you follow. So let's look at the frog, for example. So the frog, if the lavender producer gets eaten by the butterfly, primary consumer, gets eaten by the frog, that makes the frog the secondary consumer, producer, primary, secondary. However, look at another pathway. If you've got the lavender being eaten by the butterfly, being eaten by the dragonfly, which is a predator, then the dragonfly being eaten by the frog, you've got producer on the lavender, primary consumer butterfly, secondary consumer dragonfly. Frog suddenly becomes the tertiary consumer, as is the thrush if it eats the butterfly as well. So you've got frog and thrush on here occupying more than one tertiary level, trophic level. So those 2 are a little bit different to the rest that we've got on here. However, you've still got individual food webs, food chains that you could pick out on here: lavender, butterfly, frog, python, producer, primary, secondary, tertiary consumer. So you still can pick those out. But depending on the pathway you take through a food web, it can alter which trophic level the organism is. But what's always true is that organisms that are secondary consumers or higher tend to occupy more than one trophic level. Omnivores always occupy at least 2 trophic levels. They have to, because they're a primary consumer when they eat plants, but they're not a primary consumer, they're secondary or tertiary if they're eating any other animals. So the omnivores are always in at least 2 trophic levels, and herbivores can only ever be primary consumers. So that's just some vital rules about linking up trophic levels with food webs. Okay, last concept on this video, and it's still just an extension of what we've done on food webs, and it links up to what we were doing at the end of predator-prey as well. This is a really important biological concept in ecology. It's called interdependence. Now break that word apart. Dependence just means when things depend on something. Inter means kind of within. So we're talking about the dependence within a food web. So let's pull our food web back up on here. And let's put a few key points. So interdependence is a word to describe how all the organisms in any ecosystem or food web are all dependent on all the others. That's a key definition. In other words, a change in the population of one species will change the population of any other species. Now we know how a change in predators can affect the prey, and we know how a change in prey can affect the predators. But notice what I'm saying here is a change in one can affect anything in the food web, even if it's totally unrelated, even if they don't eat each other or are eaten by each other, there's still an effect. So let's talk about an example here. So for example, if a farmer puts out poison to kill the rats, so I put the rats in a circle there so you know what I'm talking about. Look where rats are. They're eaten by pythons, they're eaten by eagles, they're eaten by a wolf. They feed on grasshoppers, and according to our food web, that's it. So they're related by feeding to those 4 things: the python, the wolf, the eagle, and the grasshopper. But if the rats get killed because a farmer has poisoned them, how might that change the thrush population? Now the thrush is just there on the opposite side of the food web. Thrush doesn't eat a rat, rat doesn't eat a thrush. They're not related in terms of feeding relationship, but they will affect each other. Now the nice thing about interdependence is it's very, very hard to predict what will happen. So you can't really give a wrong answer here. You could decide, well, I think thrush population will go up. As long as you can justify that, that's fine. You might decide thrush population goes down. Again, as long as you can justify it, that's fine. So let's look at a possibility here. How might it affect the thrush population? Well, if a farmer puts out poison to kill the rats, the population of thrushes may decrease, may go down, because the eagles at the top now don't have any rats to eat, so they'll eat more thrushes. Okay, so the eagle's the link now. If the eagles can't eat the rats, they'll go, well, what can I eat? Thrushes, brilliant, I'll eat the thrushes. So that's a valid explanation for why the thrush population might decrease. But the population of thrushes may increase, because without rats to eat them, the grasshopper population will increase, because rats eat grasshoppers. So without the rats there, the number of grasshoppers might increase. So the frogs would eat more grasshoppers and therefore less dragonflies. And if there's less dragonflies being eaten by the frogs, there's more dragonflies available for the thrushes. So the thrushes have suddenly got lots of their prey and their numbers can increase. It's a bit more of a long-winded explanation, but it means the absolute opposite could be true, that thrush numbers could increase, or they could decrease, or they could stay the same. The key thing here is it's a knock-on effect that's very, very hard to predict. Okay, so the original question of how might it change the thrush population could go up, could go down, depending on what happens with all the other knock-on domino effects throughout the whole food web. And that's why interdependence is so important, because everything has a knock-on effect of everything else. And that's hard to predict. We don't know what will happen, which is why every species within an ecosystem is important. Because if you take one out, you destroy one, one gets damaged, everything will change as well. Okay, so interdependence, hopefully straightforward. You can't really be wrong as long as you can justify your answer. Okay, that's it for this one. Hopefully that was very straightforward. Food webs, just linking multiple chains together, but as soon as you do that, everything can have impacts on each other, and that's what interdependence was. So from here, move on to Ecology 4, that's communities and ecosystems. That's more just some stuff to memorize. There's not a lot to actually learn and understand in that one. It's more some key points and some key terms that you need to be aware of. Please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and if this video is useful, please don't forget to click the little like button beneath it on its homepage. Thank you.